You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
Dave, I've got a stack waddy for you.
Good.
In the light of a conversation we were having only yesterday about puns that we never got at the time.
Oh, yes.
Sandy Shaw, Perry Farrell. We'd forgotten that. Perry Farrell, meaning
I never knew that.
I'd forgotten that. Faye Fife, we didn't realise there was a pun. Pete Briquette. So in the light of that, Kimono My House by Sparks came out exactly 50 years ago this month. And which was a pun, which I never realised till quite recently. There was a pun on the 1951 toe tapper by Rosemary Clooney, Come On to My House. You knew this, didn't you?
Well, I did, actually, in that case, because I do remember thinking, oh, yeah, that's Come On to My House, yeah. But I didn't specifically relate it to Rosemary Clooney. I just thought, oh, it's a well-known phrase of saying kind of thing. But anyway.
Oh, right, exactly. Yeah. It could be, yeah. But in the spirit, of great punning album titles, Electric Landlady, Rubber Soul, Aladdin Sane, Ruth is Stranger Than Richard, and some not so great ones. I've got a few punning titles here, one of which isn't real. The rest are real. Okay, you have to spot the ringer. Okay,
yeah.
So, was there an album by Public Enemy called New Whirl Odor? New Whirl Odor.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
Okay. Was there a record called Lead Me Not Into Penn Station by Block? Was there a record called A Whole Lallo Schifrin going on? Yes, there was.
Yes, there was. There was. I know
We know that. We know. Okay. You can tune a piano, but you can't tune a fish.
That's a real record. That's Frank Zappa's.
It was REO Speedwagon.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yeah. Road to Rouen by Supergrass.
That's real. That's real.
Okay. Oral and Hearty. That's a weird one, isn't it? By Motion Worker, the jazz musician. Oral and Hearty, as in Laurel and Hardy. I mean, you get Oral and Hearty. Okay. Yourself is Steam by Mercury Rev. Okay. Funk Shui by John Oates. This is one I want not to be true, actually. The Berry Vest of Gilbert O'Sullivan. It is real. There's an awful cover with, as you can imagine, with a sort of T-shirt with, I don't know, berries on it. And lastly, The Horse Foreman of the Apocalypse, Bruce Dickinson solo album, which he's bellowing into the microphone on the cover. So one of those isn't real.
Well, I know immediately which one isn't real, but I'm grateful to be apprised of the ones I didn't know of and reminded of the ones that I did know of. But I happen to know the one that isn't real is The Horse Foreman of the Apocalypse, because I know that's a headline you wrote many years ago.
Paul Denoyer wrote. Yeah,
Paul Denoyer.
Led Zeppelin. It's good, isn't it?
It's a good one. And
that's true.
You've carried it around looking for a place to use it.
And I've finally
in the 40 years since, and you've finally found it. So congratulations.
I've got to mention Saxon Violins. Saxon Violins by Blind Justice. I have to say that I think Lead Me Not Into Penn Station by Block is a genuinely good album title. I love it.
Absolutely. Do you remember that book? There's a book I always used to see in bookshops, which I always used to stand there and muse over and never read, called By Grand Central Station I Sat Down and Wept. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do.
I always found that a very engaging idea.
Fantastic.
Never went any further, never read it. I can't remember who it's by.
And you want to know why, and why there?
Yeah, it was just one of those titles that, that caught my fancy. So anyway, well done with your stand.
You won.
Well, yeah, I did. For what it's worth. I don't suppose I get a major cash prize. I don't suppose I get a fridge magnet in the shape of the Parthenon in Athens, do I?
Which is what we're giving away to our quiz contestants this month. Worth having, I'm going to tell you.
Absolutely, definitely. So Duane Eddy passed away. Kind of a major figure in popular music. I seem to recall just before the Beatles, in that kind of that period where also Roy Orbison held sway. You know what I mean?
I can remember. It's one of my first memories.
Oh, go on.
Peter Gunn. Now, I can remember Peter Gunn being on the radio because it was such a memorable track, wasn't it? Dum 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 dum, and that horn sound, and having never heard anything like that in my life. And I mean, I probably don't remember it when it came out because I was 4 or 5 or whatever. But certainly the end of the 50s or the early 60s, I really do remember that song. I remember that playing in little cafes in the high road.
Yeah.
Fantastic sound.
It's sound, isn't it? And that's the kind of the key thing, isn't it? You know, that that's what you realize when you look at the whole sweep of popular music over kind of our lifetimes, if you like, our very long lifetimes. That's the big change, is the change from song to sound, isn't it? It's from performance to record. And Duane Eddy always used to say this, that he was interested in sound, not anything else, you know. And so he had this very specific sound, didn't he? No, it's not a bass, is it? No. He's just playing the bottom strings, basically, of a guitar. Is that right?
Yeah.
And that's how he distinguished himself. Whereas, you know, Hank Marvin or the Ventures or Les Paul or, you know, the other kind of people who were known for the guitar at the time tended to play at the top of the range, didn't they? Whereas his was always the kind of stern, stirring kind of cowboy sound, wasn't it? It was a sound that made you think of the great outdoors. You know, you were galloping across the western plain.
It was. And didn't he finish up in cowboy films? Well, he was in a film called The Wild Westerners, wasn't he?
Oh, was he really? I didn't know that.
Playing the part of Deputy Marshal Clint Fallon. So that little fantasy actually came true. But I think you're right, because around that time, I think it was to do with the fact that people were no longer sitting there, you know, as they did in the mid-50s, listening to those records on the radio, listening to them on their gramophones or whatever. They're actually going out and they were seeing those bands. So it was about a sound and a look, wasn't it? About rock and roll, R&B, skiffle, particularly. It was about a particular sound, wasn't it? It's not.
But also, I don't know anybody else in popular music, and I stand to be corrected if anybody's coming up with a rebuttal here. I don't know anybody whose sound was so clearly marketed in fact, it had a one-word descriptor, which was twang.
Twang. I just had a look at the
twangy, and so the shorthand for referring to Duane Eddy in the late 50s, early 60s became, he's the man with the twang. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so 9 out of 10 of his album titles seem to major on the fact that the amount of twang.
I've got them up here, actually.
Go on, what have you got?
Twangy guitar will travel.
Perfect.
The twang's the thing. Twisting and twanging. Which I've just found a copy of in the attic, which is a kind of crossover classic, isn't it? It's twist and twang. Covering both markets. Genius. There's twangy guitar, silky strings, twang a country song, twanging up a storm, Twang in the Golden Hits, Twangsville, the biggest twang of all, and the Roaring Twangies, my favourite. And the compilations were $1 million worth of twang. There were 2 volumes of that.
There were, yeah.
20 terrific twangies. Twangy Peaks, amazing. Twang Thang, the Duane Eddy anthology, and Twangin' from Felix to LA. That drives home the point.
That really sounds a
genre.
That really sounds like a kind of Stack Waddy game in the making, doesn't it? Really?
It is.
Which of those is made up? Because already out of that list, I thought some of those sound as if they've been cooked up. Some of those sound like internet pastiches, you know.
Yeah, the Roaring Twangies.
The Roaring Twangies. But have you also, I tried to send you a picture of this morning.
Oh, I saw it, yeah.
In 1965, he made Duane Eddy Does Bob Dylan, you know, which is instrumental versions of Bob Dylan songs. And the cover, this is 1965, so this is just a few months after Bob Dylan's put out Bringing It All Back Home, which, as we discussed recently on the podcast, was the first of those sort of lifestyle-y presentations on covers. And the Duane Eddy does Bob Dylan. If you haven't seen this, go and have a look at it. It's absolutely classic.
It's fantastic.
Some designer has been hired to kind of put Duane in some sort of bohemian context, which was not Duane Eddy's natural, area at all. And so there he is, sitting very uncomfortably perched on a number of scatter cushions. And there's got not one beautiful woman, but two beautiful women with him in the picture. One of whom is perched on what appears to be an agonizing piece of kind of modern furniture. Isn't that right?
It is.
And the other one on the left is she's made up to look like Juliet Greco. She's looking at a rose while poring over a number of books, all of which have the title Wisdom. So that's the idea that so nothing more perfectly characterizes the shift that took place in popular music in the mid-60s from kind of, we all chase the simple pleasures of cars and girls and soda pop and twisting and so forth, to know we're suddenly all indoors studying the wisdom of the ages and thinking profound thoughts. Nothing catches that better than Duane Eddy does Bob Dylan. And also the very idea of instrumental versions of somebody who is primarily known by many people as being all about the words is a kind of funny idea. Didn't this come up recently when Bob Dylan was nominated for his Nobel Prize for Literature? I think he said this at some point. I've read a quote.
What did he say?
Well, he said something about, people go on about the words, but I think, people, I'd like to be recognized for the other things I do. So, and I think he said I was very pleased that Duane Eddy did a record of my songs, of my tunes. He pointed this out at some stage, So you imagine it's the kind of thing that sticks in Bob Dylan's mind.
But also, it was trying to make the point, wasn't it, at the time, that pop music had, fathomless depth.
Oh, well, that cover
wasn't this superficial thing that the parents' generation thought it was, that it was deep and it was meaningful.
Of course, Duane Eddy was, brought back into the public mind with that kind of Art of Noise reworking.
They did a rework of Peter Gunn, didn't they? And also he made a record, I'd forgotten this, he made a record with Richard Hawley. Not that long ago.
Oh, he did?
They wrote 18 songs in 11 days or something, didn't they?
He did.
Those lovely things that just, what a perfect marriage, the two of them. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Because Richard Hawley's act is very derived from Duane Eddy.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
So anyway, the other thing this week, I've been going through a Little Feat stage this week.
Oh, nice.
And I was playing Feet Don't Fail Me Now and Dixie Chicken and all these records that they made in the 74, 75, that kind of period. And I realized I didn't have a CD copy of Feet Don't Fail Me Now, or if I have, I've lost it. And it's just ridiculous, Mark. I shouldn't be like this. I've got millions of records, millions. But if I get obsessed with something and I can't find it, it drives me mad. I almost can't sleep. I think it's got to be here somewhere in the house. Where can I put it? Because mainly it's in alphabetical order, but there's piles here, there's piles there, or whatever.
And there's that terrible temptation. You could just buy it again.
Well, let me tell you.
You could just click on something for 99 pence or whatever. And there it is.
I couldn't wait that long. No. I went into town, and as we're going past Fopp and Covent Garden, I go in there and I look for CD Feet Don't Fail Me. I've got the record, obviously, and so forth, but and they haven't got it. But what they have got is this, Mark. They've got holds up a little box on Zoom call here, a little box where you get 5 Little Feat albums.
Wow.
Little Feat, Sailing Shoes, Dixie Chicken, Feet Don't Fail Me Now, and the last record album for how much, Mark?
It's going to be something ridiculous, like £3.20 or something.
£15. Okay.
Oh, God, that's unbelievable.
£15 for five
albums.
So I thought, well, I got to do that.
They're good records.
They're just insanely good. And, it is a classic case of, how you've just got to get on the wavelength of music, and it doesn't always strike you. Of course, I've loved Little Feat since, 72, 73 or whatever. But I could go through whole years and not listen to them at all. But this week, I put a few of these things on. I also put on Robert Palmer's Pressure Drop, which they played on. They were the band on.
Yeah.
And I just played these records round and round. And I had one of those moments where I just utterly reconnected with them, you know what I mean? And they're
one of the most exciting things I've ever seen in my life.
Extraordinary.
Little Feat in 1977. Unforgettable.
Oh, they're just ridiculous. And I'll tell you what is the strange thing, is looking at the sleeves of the old records. And the sleeves were all, and Little Feat lived their life in, when Lowell George was alive, because he left and then he died in 79, I think. But they were just chaotic during that period, 74, 75. And you can read the level of chaos on the covers of these records. Because loads of the time that there's like the lyrics of a song are placed on the back of the record, and then they're crossed through with a handwritten note says, maybe next time, because they were just changing their mind. And Spanish Moon, which I think is arguably their greatest record, with a brilliant horn arrangement by Van Dyke Parks, in fact, produced by Van Dyke Parks. And Lowell George wanted him to produce the whole album, but Warner Brothers wouldn't let it because they knew how much money Van Dyke Parks spent on records. But anyway, Spanish Moon, which is the jewel of, Feet Stand Fail Me Now, it's not on the cover. It's not on the cover at all. I thought, am I forgetting something? I got this wrong. And of course, there it is. It's on the record. It's listed on the label copy, and it's on the record. It's the last track on the first side, but it's not on the cover at all. They changed their mind. Anyway, one thing I've found on Lowell George's sleeve notes, because he always did the sleeve notes for these things, Feast Don't Fail Me Now, where he goes through what each member of the band plays. I think he's credited as guitars, vocal, cowbell. That's all he does, cowbell, But then he says, Kenny Gradney, bass. And then he says, do not take lightly this bit of musicianship one dismisses simply as bass, which I think to myself, what a profound truth that is. How true that is, and because when people used to revere bass players, which they only did occasionally, because the kind of flash harrys of rock bands were always guitar players or maybe keyboard players or maybe even drummers, but bass players not so much. The only people they revered were people like Jack Bruce, you know what I mean, who were kind of very busy.
John Entwistle. There was show-offs. Jaco Pastorius, Flea, people like later on.
Absolutely.
So I don't think of that as being the kind of, those aren't the great bass players. Great bass players are the ones in the background doing a lot of heavy lifting, but very, very surreptitiously and unobtrusively.
It's also I've never played in a band. I don't know, you have, but that's the way it always kind of seems to me. Like I've said to you before, I always think that one of the brilliant things about the Beatles was that the most accomplished musician played the bass. They made him play the bass. He didn't want to play the bass, but they made him play the bass. And so the only reason to do that, Brian Wilson in the Beach Boys, same thing. The only reason to do that is you recognize that a great bass player makes the band more than the sum of its parts. It pulls the thing together. It's kind of adhesive quality, isn't it?
McCartney, pretty much the best example. Do you think?
Yeah, well, absolutely.
It's foundation. He's the propulsion of it. He's the energy. He's the counterpoint. He's the melody. If you look at songs like "Come Together" or "Something" or "A Day in the Life," it's absolutely transformed by what he does. Incredible.
Yeah, and
greatest bass line, surely Aston Barrett on the Burning album's the original recording of "I Shot the Sheriff." I mean, it's just ridiculous. ridiculous. I can remember hearing that the first time and thinking, I've never heard anything like it. Because it underpins the song, but it also kind of leads from the front and back and has little rhythms and little melodies that nobody else is playing. It's ridiculous. And it's rubbery and it's bouncy and it's tuneful. It's phenomenal.
And of course, nobody, well, in fact, the overwhelming majority of people just don't notice it at all. Whereas there's a great tradition in entertainment of people applauding things that are ostentatiously, that are kind of showy. It's like, it's like people think the greatest acting is Daniel Day-Lewis or whatever, It's not.
No, it's an understatement.
It's understatement all the time.
It's selflessness.
It's doing hardly anything at all.
Yeah.
But recognizing that has a value for the bigger picture, and the bass players are the kind of the representative of that way of doing things in popular music, aren't they? Whereas everybody, there's a great tendency in people's view in any kind of art. The people applaud when there appears to be a lot of something. What's a great drummer? Oh, it's a drummer who drums a lot. No, it's not. It's a drummer who does probably the bare minimum. You know what I mean? It's the same in football or anything like that. Who are the great players? They're the people who are doing the heavy lifting down the back. That the people in the team recognise. That's
You're just applauding flash, aren't you? And dexterity.
Yeah.
Another great one, James Jamerson's "You Can't Hurry Love." It's a fantastic bass part.
It is.
Oh my God! It switches just before you expect it to switch, and he's got that brilliant thing of a lightness of touch, but also an immense weight about it. It's really heavy, and yet it skips and swings. It's just phenomenal.
Yeah, it is.
Probably invented that morning,
yeah, possibly. But as Lowell George says, do not take lightly this bit of musicianship one dismisses simply as bass. Wise words.
The Word Podcast. Prime cuts of popular culture served fresh each week.
I noticed there's a special edition of Smash Hits just being published about Taylor Swift. I couldn't work out if that was a good idea or a bad idea, actually. But, I mean, it did interest me because somebody had posted something recently about Select magazine, saying how they loved Select magazine's poster section. You remember it had that 16-page central section called Images, where you got your pictures of Carter or whoever it was, or Blur, or the Pulp Fiction cast or whatever. And I was thinking, I wonder if there was still a market for the posters. There must be. Because if you're a Taylor Swift fan, where would you get pictures of her to put on your bedroom wall, etc.?
That's true.
So I thought, everything, your relationship with her really is entirely digital, isn't it? You don't have pictures you can kind of pin up. So I thought it was quite a good idea. I mean, the fact that it's Smash Hits is neither here nor there, really, because anybody interested in Taylor Swift would have been born after Smash Hits closed and have no idea what it was. And there wouldn't be any kind of house style or humour or any of that kind of stuff. But it just interested me, and I just wondered if there was still a market for.
Well, it's interesting because only this week I was reading Colin Morrison. It's a guy I know, and Colin's worked in and around magazine publishing for a long time. He does a very good industry kind of tip sheet newsletter called Flashes and Flames, and his big thing this week is about the growth of what are known in the trade as bookazines.
Yeah.
And this is, they've been around for about 20 years or something, but apparently they're doing quite well. And sometimes they're branded using the kind of umbrella of a well-known title like Smash Hits or Good Housekeeping or something like that. But they don't have to be. And they're very often, about people wishing to kind of mark or celebrate their enthusiasm for something at a particular time. And so a lot of it's about timing, about getting the getting the title out into the shops or wherever you put it at the right time. And so a lot of these things tend to be royal related, or, you know, major coronations or royal weddings or whatever. They might also be around big sporting achievements, triumphs. You know, if somebody wins the Super Bowl in the States and they haven't done it in years or whatever, you might be able to do really well out of
the old one-offs, isn't it? That
it's more
than adamant one-offs. You know, when he was really big.
Yeah, but also I don't know what the price of the Taylor Swift one is, but I would guess it's fairly high, you know, because there's no point in it not being high. You know, there's kind of no point in making. And also,
if anybody wants it, they want it badly, you know.
Talking of magazine prices, I've got a piece about Richard and Linda Thompson in the new issue of the New Statesman.
I saw,
which is a weekly. So I went and bought it. How much, Mark? How much?
New Statesman. My God, it's going to be a lot, isn't it? Rather than a little. I mean, it's probably going to be something like 8 to 9 quid.
Well, it was nearly 6 quid.
It's a lot.
Which I thought, that's for a weekly.
I know.
But, you know, I suppose that's kind of fair enough. That's the economics. That's what you have to do, you know. So Taylor Swift, you would have even said, I'm kind of surprised that they haven't happened earlier, those things, you know, because if you look back, you know, the late Felix Jennings, who we both knew, you know, and Felix did well out of loads of things. But
he did particularly well out of one-shots.
Computer magazines and one-shots. Yeah. One-shots. And Bruce Lee was the beginning of his huge one-shot golden streak, wasn't it?
Oh, it was. And he had just ruthless, cold commercial edge about it all, which I now rather admire, but my naive and rather romantic younger self used to find it a bit irksome. I remember when John Lennon died, he just put the call out to everybody, said, "In now, come on, we're going to do a one-shot." Everyone was still weeping and sitting in a ring of candles. Nah, forget all that. Come on, just bang it out. You get the pictures. I'll bang out some captions. It'll be in the shops tomorrow lunchtime, you know.
That's, I suppose, the golden rule of successful one-off or bookazine publishing is
speed.
You've got to suggest it at the point when most people think it's too early.
Yeah.
Because that's the time to do it. If you wait until absolutely everybody thinks it's a great idea, you've probably waited too long. You know, somebody else has got in there. So talking to magazines, when you say Paul Burke, friend of the podcast, got in touch recently, what's he got? He's got a full set of magazines.
Well, the first 50 words, I think it is, which he doesn't want to throw away. But Mrs. Paul Burke, I think, is suggesting they're taking up too much space. So he was saying that if anybody wanted any, maybe they just get in touch with us, actually.
Get in touch with us.
Word in your attic website, whatever, email address, and just let us know which ones you're looking for. And he is volunteering to go to the post office and post them to people.
Which is very generous.
Incredibly generous of him.
I think we should make this clear at this point. I think he's only talking about UK posting.
Yes.
I don't want anybody in Australia thinking he can afford to post it out there. In other media news, I'm sorry, I meant to talk to you about this. I've got in front of me a piece from the Times, Hugo Rifkind reviewing Jeremy Clarkson's Farm, which I think is returned from the new series.
It's but the Amazon thing, isn't it? Yeah.
He's got a headline which I thought was really good, and I wonder what you thought of this. He said, "I would watch Jeremy Clarkson boil an egg," and the whole thing is about, you know, like him or loathe him, it just doesn't matter, you know, because he has this utter genius for being able to just do things on camera that most people can't do and have you watch it, you know. And he has, hasn't he? You know.
Oh, unbelievable! I think, you know, no matter what you may not agree with all the things he represents. That's not the point. That's not the point. I can remember him being the first person I ever heard who used the expression, "I said that out loud," didn't he?
Oh yes.
Just a brilliant guy.
He did.
You say something ridiculous, then you look at the camera guiltily, you know. I've still never seen that program, the Diddley Squat thing, but apparently it's incredibly funny. And the big star is the 25-year-old
Caleb, or whatever it's called.
That's right, the farmer. That's right.
Well, I haven't seen it either, and I'm sure it's really good. Because I know how good he is.
Yeah.
It's just him and a camera. He knows how to do it. And anybody out there who thinks that's easy, go and have a go.
Yeah.
It really is not easy at all. He just has remarkable talent for doing it. And when you consider that, for the most of his first bit of his career, he didn't do it at all, because he was a magazine journalist, wasn't he? I can remember.
Yeah, he was.
He used to be the guy who used to write. I used to see him at Do's, because he used to write a column in Performance Car, I think he did. And that was before he was on telly. And so that side of him was only discovered relatively late in life. And he appears to have done rather well out of it.
He has. And in other media news, are you following the story of Co-op Arena? Isn't it extraordinary?
Oh, my God.
How does that happen? I can understand you saying, look, the venue isn't ready, so the gigs we've got in 2 weeks' time or whatever won't be able to happen, and we're going to switch to another venue for your tickets or whatever. But the idea that there were people queuing up, I think, that night to go and see an act, and then told them they had to go home. People travelled into Manchester, teenagers who then had to get home.
Something was cancelled at 10 minutes' notice. 10 minutes' notice. It was just, you say you can understand, a venue not being able to open. Well, all right, but can you think of any examples of it ever happened in your lifetime where that has occurred? I can't think of any at all. And we're supposed to be, in most respects, the world is more efficient now than it's ever been in the past, isn't it? There's more planning systems about everything, and everything's more organised than it used to be, isn't it? I think it kind of has to be, and therefore, the idea that this can happen on this scale is absolutely staggering.
It's astounding. Also, we have no indication of what it actually is that is. Well,
it's it's safety, and clearly those things have got to be thought about. They had a practice gig, didn't they, to test safety. I think they did something. It's about 2 weeks ago or something now, but also that all these gigs were lined up to be in there and haven't been able to. And it's Peter Kay, isn't it? It's
Noel Gallagher, I think.
Big people,
and big people who you've never heard of, like Boogie with a Hoodie.
Yes.
I don't know about you, Dave. See, that's another interesting thing about the world of pop music, how narrow it's become, that Boogie with a Hoodie, who I literally know nothing about, is big enough to play this. I can't remember how big this arena is. It's gigantic, isn't it? 15,000 or something. But I was looking at where I thought I'm just idly going to Google Wembley Arena and see who's playing at Wembley Arena. Various people playing at Wembley Arena in the near future include Five Finger Death Punch, who I have just about heard of, actually, Kiz Daniel and full band, don't know who Kiz Daniel is, Moneybagg Yo and DaBaby, and Trippie Redd. Now, I'm sorry, that's amazing that these people have become so huge that they can play an 8,000-seater venue, and I don't know anything about them. O2 Arena has a group called Cigarettes After Sex playing. O2 Arena is enormous, isn't it?
Are they playing the big room?
No, that's the big one. That's the big one. No, because at first I noticed that Kim Wilde was playing. I think Kim Wilde was playing the O2. She's actually playing the Indigo.
You're
so
right.
That's the little tiny one. No, this is the big one. It's astonishing, really. So the whole world has become that whole pop world is so kind of narrow and self-contained, isn't it? You can just be enormous in your own little world and have no particular
not famous
beyond
at all.
that.
Not
Absolutely.
Famous at all. I'm going to tell you a funny story, and I'm going to cross my path this week, and I'm going to tell you this without naming the individuals concerned. As a guy I know lives around the corner, we went to the pub the other night, and his son is a kind of rapper, and he's got a following. Doesn't live in the UK, lives overseas and so forth. And he was coming home, he's doing a few shows, doing a festival or whatever, he's doing this, doing that. How's it going? He's going all right, He's got a fan following, very devoted fan following, and his other interest is tattoos. in the sense that he started learning how to apply tattoos, and he also does illustration work, and so he started doing illustrations for tattoos, which fans could buy and then have turned into a tattoo. This has now moved on, Mark. So his next step is he's going to offering the service that he will tattoo fans. Yes?
My Lord.
So that's autographs taken to an incredible pitch, isn't it?
That's absolutely extraordinary.
Isn't that extraordinary? This is a guy.
Permanent marker.
Joni Mitchell, songs like tattoos, all that kind of stuff. I thought that this is where it's going, isn't it? In the future. Amazing. All right, I'll do this much for a selfie, this much for an autograph, and this much for a tattoo. I'll do some special piece of work for you. Absolutely extraordinary.
That is amazing.
Wouldn't have happened in my day.
This is a junction in the word podcast. It separates that bit from this next bit.
Every now and again, I read a piece in the American press, in the New York Times or Washington Post or whatever, about the troubles that appear to be coming down the line for the artist formerly known as Puff Daddy. And every time I get halfway through this and I just have to take a rest and I have to get in touch with you and say, Mark, have you read this?
It is bewildering.
It's just, none of this has come to court yet, but there's a number of charges.
There are 5 lawsuits pending, aren't there?
5 lawsuits pending.
What do they involve? It involve the employment of sex workers, I think. It's just bacchanalia. It's
trafficking is the word.
Trafficking. That's it. Violence and assault and, oh my God. But there's that piece mentions a kind of parallel with Great Gatsby. And it's the idea of this kind of bacchanalian excess. You used to have these things called white parties where everybody dressed in white, didn't they? And you look at the people who were there, who are keeping very quiet now. Martha Stewart, Donna Karan, Leonardo DiCaprio.
Henry Kissinger.
Howard Stern. Who's that?
Henry Kissinger.
Henry Kissinger, that's right.
It is, because basically what happened in the 90s is a Puff Daddy comes along and has a kind of genius for marketing hip-hop rap stars to a kind of wider world. It's not subcultural. It's from the subculture absolutely into the mainstream. And what goes along with it is a celebration of conspicuous wealth, glamour, youth, sex appeal, fashion, all the things that the world, and particularly the world around New York, absolutely adores. What I mean? It's that whole Met Gala society.
It's a celebration of fabulousness, but also East Coast, isn't it? And New York, a celebration. We're in the greatest place on the planet.
So he became the prime cheerleader for that kind of thing. He was always associated with this kind of thing. He was swigging Cristal, straight out of the bottle. He even had at one point, didn't he have a butler whose job it was to hold an umbrella over his head when he was on the beach at Cannes. You know what I mean?
Right.
It was like a fantasy.
Do you remember the butler's name? It was something like Bunsworth Smythe.
Something like that.
They just gave him a kind of double-barreled name to make it sound butlerish. It was fantastic.
It's the kind of thing that you would only have experienced in the past in kind of wild comedy films, possibly from the 30s, starring William Powell, or in the 70s, starring Steve Martin or something. You know what I mean? This can only be tongue-in-cheek. Nobody lives a life this mad. This scale just doesn't exist in the real world. Well, according to these lawsuits, it did exist.
It did.
And
this is the man, let's not forget, who was rumoured to be involved in the death of Tupac, wasn't he? That was a thing hanging over him. In fact, there were various court cases, which is why he changed his name to P. Diddy. Everyone was going, oh, how hilarious. He suddenly called himself P. Diddy. A lot of that was to disassociate himself from the things that Puff Daddy had been accused of doing. And let's not forget that people were very defensive of R. Kelly, weren't they? And all the stuff about R. Kelly has now come out. So it's the same thing. Everyone's keeping very quiet.
And so all the people who previously were absolutely couldn't wait to get invited to his latest white party are suddenly now keeping a very low profile. Of course, they now include everybody who was rich and fabulous in that world in the late 90s and the 21st century. It was just absolutely everybody. The notion that you wouldn't go to Puff Daddy's party if you were invited is just ridiculous.
Unthinkable.
They all absolutely went. It was all utterly unthinkable. And, it's all more grist for the argument that the most bacchanalian, excessive point in the history of popular music was not the 70s, not the 60s, it was the 90s. It was the 90s, because that's when the money was there.
That was the absolute peak, wasn't it? Peak of earning.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
How many people are sitting there as we speak and working on a script about this? Because that is a movie you want to see, isn't it? And it's a movie that must be being made. It must
if a fraction of this turns out to be, to stick, this is going to make all your favorite pop music scandals from Jerry Lee Lewis in the 1950s through to I don't know what. It's going to make them look like complete non-starters. This is just staggering. The level of it, I absolutely couldn't believe it. And of course, also what's tied up in this is he signed all these artists, didn't he?
Yeah.
To his label. All of whom were benefited massively from his patronage. He promoted them very successfully, but then held on to their publishing, didn't he? And so a number of them have sued to get their publishing back. And some of them have got it back, but they've found that it's not worth anything like what they thought it was worth, because a huge amount of the revenue generated by those records went to the samples on which they were based. And so, it's Every Breath You Take or whatever, is it I'll Be Missing You? And that was Every Breath You Take, I think it was. And, so to get those records away, you have to be prepared to pay off the people who own the original samples to get them to do it in the first place, So
when you've done that, there's not much left in the
There's
pot.
not much left. So, it's like we were talking about this the other week, and the Phil Manzanera and his, No Church in the Wild or whatever it was. He ended up there, and we're, Sting, and there's loads of others. They've probably done better out of it than anybody else at all. Because also that ties into the other thing that we were reading this week, which is, again, on the New York Times website, you can probably find this. It's a very interesting piece called What is a Song? Which was looking at the whole business of disputes about copyright around songwriting.
That's a fantastic piece. I've read that.
Yeah.
A really interesting point, which I didn't know, you probably did actually, that in 1909, when these copyright laws were first established, the definition of a song was a piece of sheet music and the lyrics. But from 1978, it became the recording of that song, which is a completely different thing. There's far more in there that you could be accused then of nicking. So therefore, it's much easier to win a case if the song itself was... I suppose were Ed Sheeran and Let's Get It On.
It's very complicated because, and that's the basis of the argument. Can you steal a record? Everybody kind of understands the idea that you could steal a song because it's written down. Here's the lead sheet. And so the case over Marvin Gaye's "Let's Get It On" and whoever was supposed to have appropriated that, I can't even remember. The jury were not allowed to hear
out loud, wasn't it? Yeah,
were not allowed to hear the Marvin Gaye version because that was too full of Marvin Gaye. So what you could hear instead was a kind of a version of somebody just simply singing the sheet music. So that's what the argument is about.
Yeah, the argument is about when does the composer's work end and the performer's work begin, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And you listen to Let's Get It On, as a record. We all know that record, 4 minutes worth or whatever it is. How much of that is the song? And how much of that is Marvin Gaye?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I would have thought it's 80% Marvin Gaye.
It is.
It's hardly a song at all. You can't sit down and play that at piano. Nobody's gathering around the piano tonight going, tell you what, give us an old song. Why don't you do Let's Get It On, Grandma? Doesn't work.
I'll get the party started.
It just doesn't work. It's Marvin Gaye. It's Marvin Gayness, isn't it? It's a brilliant vehicle for that, And can you copyright that? I don't know. I don't know if you can do. So this one will run and run. But anyway, it's all there on the New York Times. You can no doubt find it online. What is a song? And if you know the answer, send us your answer on a postcard, please.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.